I've always believed the Isle of Wight is one of the most beautiful corners of England, but beneath its charm lies something darker. Every old castle, ruined house, or quiet lane seems to whisper secrets of the past. Locals speak of ghosts that never rest, and visitors often leave with stories they can't explain. Tonight, I want to take you beyond the beaches and gardens, into the shadows of history. These aren't just tales for tourists, they're places where people still feel the presence of those long gone. Join me, as we uncover the 5 most haunted places still alive today. If you enjoy exploring real haunted places and chilling stories, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you never miss what's coming next. 1. Carisbrooke Castle, Newport. I still remember the evening when I first visited Carisbrooke Castle. It was late autumn, the air was damp, and the sky was already turning dark even though it was only around 6 p.m. The old stone walls of the castle looked beautiful from the outside, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt something different, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just the cold, it was something I couldn't explain. I had read about the ghost stories, especially about the Grey Lady, but honestly, I never believed them. That night changed everything. While exploring the well house, I leaned over the edge just to look down. The silence there was unsettling, almost too quiet. Suddenly, I heard the sound of water moving, even though the well had been dry for years. My first thought was that it must be my imagination, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, right behind me. I turned around immediately, but there was no one. The air had become icy cold, so cold that I could actually see my breath even though the rest of the castle didn't feel that way. I tried to shake it off and continued walking through the corridors. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just a reflection or maybe another visitor, but no one else was near me. A pale figure of a woman, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, moved silently across the hallway. She didn't make a sound, and yet, for a moment, I felt the strong scent of lavender around me. The strangest part was that she didn't look scary, she looked sad, almost heartbroken. I stood frozen, my heart racing. I wanted to call out, but my throat went completely dry. She slowly turned her head, and though her face was blurred, I could feel her eyes on me. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she vanished into the wall. I cannot explain what I felt in that moment. It wasn't like in horror movies where you scream and run. It was more personal, like I had just witnessed someone's grief that had been trapped there for centuries. Later, when I asked a local guide about it, he told me that many visitors had seen the Grey Lady near the well house, and some even claimed she belonged to the family who once lived there and lost everything. Even now, whenever I think back to that night, a chill runs through me. I went there expecting history and old stones, but I left believing that Carisbrooke Castle still holds onto its ghosts, and maybe, they're just waiting for someone to listen. 2. Appuldurcombe House, Wroxall. When I first stepped into the ruins of Appuldurcombe House, I felt a strange mix of sadness and beauty. The grand stone walls, broken windows, and empty archways made me imagine what this mansion must have looked like in its prime. But as I walked deeper inside, I realized the silence here wasn't the normal kind. It had weight to it, like the air itself was watching me. It was a cloudy afternoon, and apart from a couple of tourists outside, I was mostly alone. The ground was damp, and the smell of wet earth mixed with something I couldn't quite place, almost like burning candles. I carried my phone in my hand, thinking I'd take some pictures, but the further I went, the less I felt like lifting the camera. Inside one of the large halls, I stood quietly, just listening. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of chanting, like several voices humming together. At first, I thought it might be wind echoing through the arches, but the sound was too steady, too human. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it must be tourists, but when I looked back, the place was empty. Then I saw movement in the corner of the hall. Shadows. At first, just a flicker, like someone walking quickly past the doorway. I froze. Slowly, from the far end of the room, shapes began to form. Figures in long robes, their faces hidden in hoods, walking silently in a line. My hands turned cold and shaky, but my eyes couldn't look away. One of them stopped. I swear, I could feel his attention on me even though I couldn't see his face. It was as if the air between us grew heavier, pressing against my chest. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs refused. For a brief second, I thought I heard Latin words whispered, though I couldn't understand them. And then, just like smoke fading, the figures vanished. The room went silent again. I stood there in shock, struggling to catch my breath. It didn't feel like a dream or imagination, it felt real. Too real. Later, when I asked about it in the village nearby, a woman told me that monks were once associated with the land and that many visitors had seen robed figures wandering the ruins. She said they were restless spirits, replaying their rituals long after death. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadowy figure turning toward me. I had gone to Appuldurcombe house expecting nothing more than ruins, but I left with the memory of something I'll never forget. 3. Knighton Gorges Manor, Newchurch. I had heard stories about Knighton Gorges Manor before, about how the building no longer stands but people still see it appear on certain nights. Honestly, I thought it was just local folklore. But one evening, curiosity pulled me there. The road leading to the site felt lonely, with trees pressing in on both sides. By the time I reached the entrance gate, the sun had already dipped low, painting the sky with orange and purple. The ruins themselves were gone, but the ground carried an energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was quiet, too quiet. I walked closer to the spot where the manor once stood. For a while, nothing unusual happened. I stood there thinking, maybe the stories are exaggerated. But then, as the light faded, something shifted. Out of nowhere, I caught sight of what looked like stone walls forming in the distance. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but the more I stared, the clearer it became, a grand house, solid, standing exactly where everyone said it once was. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't vanish. It stood there in the twilight, its windows dark and empty. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My heart raced, and I could actually hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then, the sound of hooves broke the silence. From the shadows of the lane, a rider appeared. A man on a horse, but his body looked strange. He had no head. I froze in place, every muscle stiff. The horse moved slowly, its hooves heavy on the ground, yet there was no dust, no echo. The rider seemed to glide more than ride. He passed right in front of me, and though I couldn't see a face, I felt something, an overwhelming wave of anger and despair. It was so strong that I had to step back to catch my breath. The horse and rider didn't acknowledge me, they just kept moving toward the manor. And then, in the blink of an eye, both the rider and the manor disappeared, leaving nothing but the empty field. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but deep down I knew I had just witnessed something I could never explain. Later, when I mentioned it to a local, she nodded knowingly and told me that many people had seen the phantom building and the headless horseman at Knighton Gorges. Some believe the land is cursed, forever replaying fragments of its tragic past. Even now, when I think back to that evening, I feel the same chill running down my spine. I went there expecting ruins, but instead, I came face to face with the past that refuses to rest. 4. Ventnor Botanic Garden, Old Hospital Site. The first time I visited Ventnor Botanic Garden, I didn't go there for ghosts. I just wanted to see the plants and walk around the old grounds. But I knew that, before it became a garden, this place was once a tuberculosis hospital. That thought never left my mind as I walked through the winding paths. It was a cool afternoon, the kind of day when the sea breeze carries a salty smell across the island. The garden looked peaceful, bright flowers, tall trees, and birds singing. But as I walked further away from the main path, closer to the old hospital buildings that still stood, the mood shifted. The air felt colder, heavier. I stopped near a long, empty corridor-like structure. There was nothing around me, no tourists, no staff. That's when I heard it, a faint cough. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, clearer this time, like someone struggling to breathe. My skin prickled. I knew I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't. I kept walking slowly, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. Then I heard whispers, low voices, like patients talking quietly among themselves. I turned quickly, but the path behind me was empty. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else. As I reached the edge of one old wall, I froze. Standing just a few feet ahead was a figure of a woman dressed in white, like a nurse from another century. She didn't move at first. She just stood there, looking down at the ground. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Then, without lifting her head, she walked across the path and faded into the wall as if it wasn't even there. I wanted to convince myself I was imagining it, but the scent of disinfectant, sharp and chemical, suddenly filled the air, so strong it almost made me gag. Shaking, I turned back toward the main garden as fast as I could. Along the way, I felt a hand brush against my arm. It was soft but ice cold. I spun around, but no one was there. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just imagining things. Something from the hospital days was still lingering there. Later, when I told a guide about what I experienced, she nodded knowingly. She said many people had heard the same coughing sounds, footsteps, and even seen nurses walking the old grounds. She explained that during the TB outbreak, countless patients had died here, and maybe their spirits never left. I left the garden that day with beautiful photos of flowers, but in my memory, all I could see was that nurse fading into the wall and the cold hand that touched me. It was peaceful on the surface, but beneath it, I felt the weight of all those lives that ended there. 5. Hare and Hounds Pub, Arreton Down. I visited the Hare and Hounds pub on a chilly evening in late October. From the outside, it looked warm and inviting, with yellow lights glowing through the old windows. I had heard stories about the ghost of a highwayman who still haunted this place, but I told myself those were just tales to attract visitors. Still, a part of me was curious. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy, wooden beams, the smell of food, and quiet chatter from a few locals. I found a table in the corner and ordered a drink. For a while, everything felt normal. But then, as the evening grew darker, the mood seemed to shift. I noticed the fireplace. The flames danced brightly, but every now and then, the light dimmed as if a shadow passed in front of it. I turned to look, expecting to see someone walk by, but there was no one near it. My stomach tightened. A little later, as I sipped my drink, I felt something strange. It was like someone was standing just behind me, watching. I turned quickly, but the space was empty. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I laughed nervously to myself, trying to brush it off. That's when I saw him. In the reflection of the window beside me, a figure appeared. A tall man dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with a long coat and a wide hat. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes seemed hollow. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around to face him directly, but there was nothing there. The chair across from me was empty. I sat frozen, gripping my glass so hard my hand shook. Then, suddenly, the strong smell of leather and damp earth filled the air, like a horseman had just ridden in from the road. The scent was so real, I could almost hear the clinking of reins. A cold breeze brushed past me, though all the windows were shut. I heard boots, heavy boots, walking across the wooden floorboards. The sound came closer and closer until it stopped right behind my chair. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My chest was tight, and my breath came in short gasps. Finally, I forced myself to glance sideways. In the corner of the room, I saw him again, the highwayman. This time, he was standing, looking straight at me. His expression wasn't angry, but it was full of sadness, almost like he knew his fate was sealed here. In the blink of an eye, he faded away, leaving nothing but silence. When I finally asked the bartender about what I had seen, he just smiled knowingly and said, "Ah, you've met Harry the highwayman." Many do. I left the pub that night shaken, but one thing was certain, I no longer doubted the stories. The Hare and Hounds may serve good food and drinks, but it also carries a ghost who refuses to leave.